Introduction: a clash of titans in the Pacific. The engine screamed, a furious symphony against the vast, empty canvas of the Pacific sky. Below, the ocean's expanse stretched, featureless and unforgiving. Inside the cockpit of his SBD Dauntless dive bomber, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey peered through the haze, a knot of desperation tightening in his gut. His fuel gauges screamed empty, his squadron was running on fumes, and still, there was nothing. For hours, they had scoured the endless blue, searching for the enemy's carriers, the very heart of the Japanese fleet. Just as the decision to turn back began to form, a glint of white, a ship's wake, shimmered on the horizon. Not one, not two, but 3 Japanese carriers, caught in the most vulnerable moment, their decks laden with armed and fueled aircraft. In that instant, McCluskey knew. What happened next, in mere minutes, would forever alter the course of World War II. By mid-1942, the war in the Pacific had been a relentless march of Japanese victories. From the devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy had swept across the Pacific, seizing islands, conquering vast territories, and seemingly standing invincible. The United States, still reeling from the initial blows, found itself on the defensive, its fleet crippled, and its morale tested. Yet, beneath the surface of apparent Japanese dominance, a desperate counter-strategy was taking shape. This was a war of intellect as much as brute force, personified by 2 strategic titans. For the United States, Admiral Chester Nimitz, the quiet, unassuming commander of the Pacific Fleet, faced the daunting task of defending what remained and preparing for an impossible fight. Opposing him was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the brilliant and daring commander-in-chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, who sought to deliver a knockout blow that would permanently cripple American naval power. Yamamoto believed that by luring the U.S. fleet into a decisive battle near Midway Atoll, he could ensure Japan's dominion over the Pacific. What neither admiral fully grasped was the scale of the turning point that was about to unfold. The Battle of Midway would not merely be another engagement. It would be a cataclysmic clash that forever shifted the balance of power. It was a battle defined by audacious gambles, split-second decisions, incredible heroism, and an intelligence coup that would prove instrumental. More than just a victory, Midway marked the moment the tide of Japanese expansion began to recede, setting the stage for the long, arduous Allied advance across the Pacific, and ultimately, their triumph in World War II. Chapter 1: Pearl Harbor and the Surge of the Rising Sun. The morning of December 7, 1941, dawned a placid Hawaiian Sunday, painted with the pastel hues of a rising sun. Sailors stirred on battleships moored along Ford Island in Pearl Harbor, their routines punctuated by the easy rhythm of off-duty hours. Families on Oahu prepared for church, beach trips, or quiet relaxation. At 7:55 a.m., the Serenity shattered. The first wave of Japanese aircraft, a relentless swarm of Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo planes, and Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters, descended from the sky. They came in low, fast, and without warning, their rising sun insignia stark against the morning light. The air instantly filled with the roar of engines, the shriek of bombs, and the terrifying thud of torpedoes striking steel. Within minutes, the harbor transformed into an inferno. The USS Arizona, hit by an armor-piercing bomb, exploded in a cataclysmic blast, killing 1,177 men and becoming a tomb for most. The USS Oklahoma capsized, trapping hundreds below decks. The USS California and West Virginia sank at their moorings. In less than 2 hours, 18 U.S. Navy ships were sunk or severely damaged, 188 aircraft destroyed, and over 2,400 Americans killed with another 1,000 wounded. The psychological impact on the United States was immediate and profound. The surprise attack, condemned as a day of infamy by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, galvanized a previously divided nation, instantly uniting it in a cry for war and retribution. Strategically, the U.S. Pacific Fleet's battleship force lay decimated, forcing a painful reevaluation of naval power and the grim realization of America's vulnerability. Pearl Harbor was merely the opening salvo in Japan's lightning conquest of the Pacific. Within hours of the attack on Hawaii, Japanese forces launched simultaneous assaults across a vast geographical expanse, revealing a meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed expansionist agenda. Guam, an isolated American outpost, fell swiftly on December 10th. The strategically vital Philippines, under the command of General Douglas MacArthur, endured a brutal and protracted struggle. The initial air attacks decimated American air power, followed by relentless ground invasions. Despite valiant resistance, Manila fell in January 1942, and by May, the last American and Filipino defenders on Corregidor surrendered, marking the largest capitulation in American military history. To the west, the British colonies crumbled. Hong Kong, besieged from December 8th, succumbed on Christmas Day 1941, after a desperate but futile defense. Malaya, with its vital rubber and tin resources, was invaded, and Singapore, the supposedly impregnable Gibraltar of the East, fell shockingly quickly in February 1942, leading to the capture of over 80,000 British, Australian, and Indian troops. The Dutch East Indies, rich in oil, gas, and other resources, also fell under Japanese control after a series of swift campaigns. Japan's momentum seemed unstoppable, their forces moving with an efficiency and ferocity that stunned the Western powers. This string of unbroken victories had a profound psychological effect. For the American public and military, it fostered a sense of demoralization and a chilling perception of Japanese invincibility. Propaganda depicted the Japanese as fanatical and relentless warriors, and the initial lack of Allied success fueled a deep-seated anxiety. On the Japanese side, the rapid expansion cultivated an almost intoxicating overconfidence. Years of careful planning, combined with intense training and a deep-seated belief in their national destiny, had seemingly paid off. The concept of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, a Japanese-led economic and political bloc free from Western influence, seemed within reach. Underpinning this aggressive expansion was a deeply ingrained Japanese military doctrine. Rooted in the ancient warrior code of Bushido, it emphasized unwavering loyalty, honor, self-sacrifice, and an absolute dedication to duty, often to the point of death. Surrender was considered the ultimate disgrace. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, the core strategic concept was kantai kessen, or decisive battle, the belief that a single, overwhelming engagement could destroy the enemy fleet and force a favorable peace. This doctrine had guided their naval buildup and training for decades, prioritizing naval superiority and striking power, particularly in their formidable carrier air groups. Coupled with this was a fervent expansionism, driven by a need for resources to fuel their industrial and military ambitions, and a conviction in Japan's rightful place as the dominant power in Asia. By early 1942, these doctrines had translated into a devastatingly effective war machine, and the future of the Pacific hung precariously in the balance. Chapter 2: The Doolittle Raid and the Call for Revenge. As spring bloomed in 1942, the relentless drumbeat of Japanese victories continued to echo across the Pacific. Yet, within the beleaguered American high command, a bold and audacious plan was secretly taking shape, born from a desperate need to strike back. The idea, initially dismissed as suicidal, was to bomb the Japanese home islands, a feat considered impossible given Japan's perceived invulnerability and the vast distances involved. The brainchild of Navy Captain Francis Lowe, and championed by President Roosevelt himself, the mission fell to the daring Army Air Force's Lieutenant Colonel James "Jimmy" Doolittle, a legendary aviator and aeronautical engineer. On April 18, 1942, this improbable dream became a reality. 16 B-25B Mitchell medium bombers, stripped down and modified for carrier launch, shuddered into life aboard the USS Hornet, steaming through rough seas hundreds of miles off the Japanese coast. The original plan called for a launch much closer to Japan, but an early sighting by a Japanese patrol boat forced Doolittle to make a fateful decision: launch immediately, 10 hours and 170 miles ahead of schedule, knowing it meant the planes would likely run out of fuel before reaching friendly airfields in China. One by one, the heavy bombers lumbered down the Hornet's deck, lifting precariously into the strong headwind, bound for Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. The Doolittle raid was, by conventional military metrics, a tactical failure. The material damage inflicted was negligible. A few factories hit, some buildings damaged, and minimal civilian casualties. All 16 bombers were lost, either crashing or ditching after running out of fuel over China, and 3 crewmen were executed by the Japanese, with a 4th dying in captivity. Yet the raid delivered a massive psychological blow to Japan, one that far outweighed its meager tactical results. The Japanese public had been assured their homeland was impregnable, shielded by a ring of victorious forces. The sight of American bombers over Tokyo shattered that illusion, causing widespread shock and humiliation within the Imperial General Headquarters. It forced the realization that Japan was not invulnerable, and that the long arm of American retaliation could and would reach their sacred soil. No one felt this blow more keenly than Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. The architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, Yamamoto had gambled on a swift, decisive campaign that would secure Japan's strategic objectives before the industrial might of the United States could fully mobilize. The Doolittle raid, however inconsequential materially, was a direct affront to his strategy and his nation's honor. It confirmed his long-held conviction that the remaining U.S. aircraft carriers, the very ships that had launched the B-25s, posed an unacceptable threat and had to be eliminated. Yamamoto was a calculated risk-taker, but he was also deeply aware of Japan's finite resources and the long-term danger of a prolonged war with America. He knew that to secure Japan's newly acquired empire, the U.S. Pacific Fleet, particularly its carriers, needed to be drawn out and utterly destroyed. Thus, the Doolittle raid became the immediate catalyst for Yamamoto to push forward his plan for the decisive battle he craved. His attention turned to Midway Atoll. Midway, a small, strategically vital island approximately halfway between Asia and North America, was a key U.S. outpost. Its capture would establish an outer defensive perimeter for Japan, protect their recent conquests, and crucially, serve as an irresistible bait to draw out the American carriers from Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto envisioned a grand, multi-pronged operation, a diversionary attack on the Aleutian Islands to confuse the Americans, followed by the invasion of Midway itself. The American carriers, he reasoned, would be forced to steam to Midway's defense, where Yamamoto's superior combined fleet, particularly his powerful carrier strike force, the Kido Butai, would be waiting to annihilate them in a climactic engagement. The plan was audacious, complex, and driven by a powerful desire for revenge and a strategic imperative to remove the last obstacle to Japan's Pacific dominance. Little did he know that the very desperation that spawned the Doolittle raid had also led to another, far more insidious American weapon, one that would soon unravel his meticulously crafted trap. Chapter 3. Breaking the Code, Station HYPO's Secret Victory. While Japanese bombs rained down on Pearl Harbor, another, far quieter battle had already been raging for months in the shadows, fought not with steel and fire, but with intellect and tireless dedication. Deep within the labyrinthine basement of the 14th Naval District headquarters at Pearl Harbor, a small, highly secretive unit known as Station Hypo, or FRUPAC Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, was engaged in the arduous, often frustrating task of breaking the Imperial Japanese Navy's primary operational code, JN-25B. This was no simple cipher. It was a complex system of 5-digit numeric groups, constantly changing, requiring immense skill, intuition, and patience to unravel. At the helm of Station Hypo was Commander Joseph Rochefort, an eccentric, brilliant, and chain-smoking cryptanalyst. Rochefort, often working in his bathrobe amidst piles of deciphered messages, possessed an almost preternatural ability to think like his Japanese adversaries. He had assembled a diverse team of linguists, mathematicians, and naval officers, all driven by a singular, desperate purpose: to understand Japanese intentions. By early 1942, they had made significant progress, able to read portions of the JN-25B code, though often only after the events they described had already occurred. The Doolittle raid, however, brought a surge of Japanese radio traffic, and with it, a critical opportunity. The cryptographers noticed repeated references to an upcoming operation against an objective codenamed AF. The crucial question was, what was AF? Through painstaking traffic analysis and partial decrypts, Rochefort and his team strongly suspected AF was Midway Atoll. But suspicion wasn't enough. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding the shattered Pacific Fleet, needed absolute confirmation to commit his precious remaining carriers to a potentially devastating confrontation. This led to a stroke of ingenious deception, orchestrated by Rochefort in concert with Midway's commander. On May 21, 1942, a plain-language message was broadcast from Midway Atoll, reporting a fabricated shortage of fresh water due to breakdown of distillation plant. Within 24 hours, Station Hypo intercepted a Japanese JN-25B message, reporting to Yamamoto that AF is short of water. The confirmation was undeniable. AF was indeed Midway. This breakthrough was nothing short of a secret victory, fundamentally altering the calculus of naval warfare. Prior to this, commanders relied on reconnaissance, intuition, and often blind luck to anticipate enemy movements. At Midway, American intelligence provided an unprecedented level of foresight. Nimitz knew the enemy's destination, the general timing of their attack, and even the composition of their strike force. This intelligence provided a distinct advantage, a stark contrast to the pre-war reliance on traditional scouting and guesswork. It allowed the U.S. Navy to prepare for an ambush rather than a desperate reactive defense. While intelligence was never perfect, there were always gaps and ambiguities. Rochefort's work instilled in Nimitz a crucial confidence that allowed him to make bold decisions. Armed with this invaluable clandestine knowledge, Admiral Nimitz quietly began to prepare his ambush. He dispatched critical reinforcements to Midway itself, bolstering its airfields and defenses with additional aircraft, anti-aircraft guns, and Marines. More crucially, he ordered his 3 available aircraft carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and the hastily repaired USS Yorktown, to converge northeast of Midway, positioning them to strike the Japanese invasion force from an unexpected direction. Nimitz's decision was a colossal gamble. He would be pitting 3 carriers, one of which was barely seaworthy, against Yamamoto's 4 most powerful and battle-hardened fleet carriers. But thanks to the unsung heroes of Station Hypo, he would be playing from a position of informed strength, setting a trap that the overconfident Japanese, unaware their most critical secrets had been laid bare, were about to sail directly into. Chapter 4. The Coral Sea and the Race to Repair. Even as Station Hypo worked feverishly to decode JN-25B, the first critical naval engagement fought almost entirely by aircraft was unfolding thousands of miles to the southwest. May 1942 saw the Imperial Japanese Navy launch Operation MO, an ambitious plan to seize Port Moresby in New Guinea and Tulagi in the Solomon Islands, aimed at establishing a powerful base to threaten Australia. To counter this, the U.S. Navy dispatched Task Force 17, centered on the aircraft carriers USS Yorktown and Lexington, under the command of Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. The ensuing Battle of the Coral Sea, fought from May 4 to May 8, 1942, would make history as the first naval battle in which opposing surface ships never sighted or fired upon each other. All attacks were carried out by carrier-borne aircraft. The battle was a complex, sprawling affair, marked by misidentification, communication errors, and brutal aerial combat. For days, scout planes crisscrossed the vast expanse of the Coral Sea, searching for the enemy. On May 7th, both sides launched major strikes based on faulty intelligence, with the Americans sinking the light carrier Shoho and the Japanese sinking an oiler and a destroyer. The climactic encounter occurred on May 8th. American dive bombers and torpedo planes found the Japanese fleet carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku. While Zuikaku managed to largely escape detection in a rain squall, Shokaku was hit by multiple bombs, sustaining severe damage to its flight deck and rendering it incapable of launching or recovering aircraft. In return, Japanese aircraft found the American carriers. The USS Lexington, hit by torpedoes and bombs, was fatally crippled by aviation fuel explosions and had to be abandoned and scuttled. The USS Yorktown, though also struck by a bomb, miraculously absorbed the hit and remained operational. From a purely tactical standpoint, the Battle of the Coral Sea could be considered a Japanese victory. They sank a U.S. fleet carrier and damaged another, while losing only one light carrier. However, strategically, it was a crucial American success. The Japanese invasion force bound for Port Moresby was forced to turn back, marking the first major Japanese offensive of the war to be repelled. More significantly for the looming battle at Midway, the Imperial Japanese Navy suffered irreplaceable losses. While Shokaku was salvageable, its repairs would keep it out of action for months. Even more critical was the state of Zuikaku. Though undamaged structurally, its air group had been so decimated in the intense air combat that it too was unavailable for the next operation. This meant that when Yamamoto launched his Midway offensive, 2 of his 6 fleet carriers, and arguably 2 of his best, would be absent. The USS Yorktown, though she survived the Coral Sea, was a limping veteran. Her flight deck was damaged, and her internal structure compromised by the bomb hit. She steamed back to Pearl Harbor under her own power, a testament to her resilience. But naval engineers estimated that repairs would take at least 3 months at the Puget Sound Navy Yard. This was time Nimitz simply did not have. With the intelligence from Station Hypo confirming the impending attack on Midway, Nimitz made another bold, almost desperate decision. He ordered Yorktown into the dry dock at Pearl Harbor and demanded that she be made ready for sea in an unprecedented 3 days. Hundreds of shipyard workers swarmed the carrier, working around the clock, welding, patching, and replacing damaged sections. Against all odds, they performed a miracle. By May 30th, Yorktown, though still far from perfect and with a skeleton crew of repairmen on board, was declared seaworthy enough to return to action. This Herculean effort meant that the U.S. Pacific Fleet, battered but unbowed, could muster 3 aircraft carriers, the USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and the patched-up USS Yorktown, to face the might of Yamamoto's 4 elite, fully operational fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. The odds still seemed overwhelmingly in Japan's favor, a fact not lost on the American sailors and airmen who knew the formidable reputation of their enemy. Yet the Battle of the Coral Sea had bought critical time, and by depleting 2 of Japan's carriers, had inadvertently created a more level, though still perilous, playing field for the monumental clash that was now just days away. The stage was set for the Pacific's most decisive naval engagement. Chapter 5. Admiral Nimitz's Gamble. With the decrypted Japanese battle plan laid out before him, Admiral Chester Nimitz faced a decision of monumental consequence. His fleet, though strengthened by the miraculous repair of Yorktown, was still numerically inferior to Yamamoto's juggernaut. Conventional naval doctrine would have dictated caution, perhaps even a withdrawal to conserve forces. But Nimitz, a quiet strategist with an iron will, understood that retreat was not an option. Losing Midway would not only grant Japan a vital forward base, bringing in their air power within striking distance of Hawaii, but it would also be a devastating blow to American morale. Instead, Nimitz chose to defend Midway, a decision that was less a defense and more an audacious gamble on a calculated ambush. He would pit his remaining, precious carriers against the might of the Imperial Japanese Navy's First Air Fleet. The core of Nimitz's strategy revolved around the precise placement of his carrier forces. He divided his available carriers into two main operational groups. Task Force 16, comprising the formidable carriers USS Enterprise and USS Hornet, was placed under the command of Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance. Known for his calm demeanor and brilliant analytical mind, Spruance was a battleship admiral thrust into carrier command, a role he would quickly prove uniquely suited for. His task force was positioned some 200 miles northeast of Midway, out of immediate range of Japanese reconnaissance, but close enough to strike once the enemy revealed themselves. Task Force 17, centered around the hastily repaired USS Yorktown, was commanded by Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. Fletcher was the senior tactical commander for the operation, a seasoned aviator with recent battle experience at Coral Sea. His force was positioned slightly to the east of Task Force 16, providing a deeper layer of defense and a reserve. The subtle distinction in leadership roles was crucial. Fletcher held overall tactical command, but Nimitz had given Spruance significant latitude, recognizing his exceptional judgment. Both admirals shared a common directive: destroy the Japanese carriers. Nimitz's strategy was clear: allow the Japanese to commit to their attack on Midway, then unleash the full fury of his carrier air groups on their vulnerable fleet. The linchpin of Nimitz's daring plan was Midway Island itself. Far from being a mere outpost, Midway Atoll was a vital, unsinkable aircraft carrier. Its two small islands, Sand and Eastern, housed crucial airfields from which U.S. Army Air Force B-17 bombers, Navy and Marine Corps dive bombers, Vindicators and Dauntlesses, and F-4F Wildcat fighters could operate. These land-based aircraft, though often outmatched by the Japanese Zero, could provide essential reconnaissance, harassment, and, if fortune smiled, even inflict damage on the invading fleet. Nimitz understood that these airfields were indispensable. They allowed his carriers to remain hidden over the horizon, conserving their precious aircraft and fuel, while the island's planes absorbed the initial enemy blows and provided critical early warnings. The decision to commit everything to Midway was not made lightly. Nimitz knew the risks were immense, the resources finite, and the consequences of failure catastrophic. Yet, armed with superior intelligence and an unwavering belief in the courage and ingenuity of his men, he chose to gamble. He placed his trust in the hands of his admirals and the raw bravery of his aviators, sending them into what he knew would be one of the most perilous naval engagements in history. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown in the Pacific, a battle where the fate of a war, and indeed the world, hung precariously on the windswept decks of a handful of ships and the skill of the young men who flew from them. Chapter 6. The Japanese Grand Strategy. While Admiral Nimitz meticulously prepared his ambush, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was finalizing the details of what he believed would be the decisive stroke of the Pacific War. His plan for Operation MI, the invasion of Midway Atoll, was a masterpiece of strategic overconfidence and tactical complexity. Yamamoto's grand design was not a single, unified thrust, but a multi-layered operation intended to confuse, decentralize, and ultimately annihilate the American fleet. The first layer was a feint toward the Aleutian Islands in the North Pacific. A separate, substantial force, including 2 light carriers, cruisers, and destroyers, would launch airstrikes against Dutch Harbor and attempt to seize Attu and Kiska Islands. Yamamoto's intention was to draw elements of the U.S. Pacific Fleet northward, away from Midway, further scattering American strength and creating an even more favorable numerical advantage for his main force. This diversion, however, would also dilute his own overall strength, dividing his carriers at a critical juncture. The true core of the operation was the Midway invasion itself. A massive invasion force comprising transports, destroyers, cruisers, and battleships would converge on Midway, aiming to land troops and establish a Japanese foothold. This force, however, was designed to be bait. Yamamoto's ultimate goal was not simply to take Midway, but to use its defense as the irresistible lure that would draw out the American carrier fleet. And it was for this carrier trap that Yamamoto reserved his greatest strength: the Kido Butai, the 1st Air Fleet, under the command of Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. This was Japan's elite strike force, the very vanguard that had devastated Pearl Harbor and swept through the Pacific. It consisted of 4 of Japan's most powerful and battle-hardened fleet carriers: the flagship Akagi, the mighty Kaga, the swift Soryu, and the tenacious Hiryu. These carriers were the apex predators of naval warfare, manned by highly trained, experienced pilots, many of whom were veterans of every major Japanese conquest since the war began. Flanking them were an imposing array of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, a formidable screen intended to protect them and engage any surface elements of the American fleet that dared to approach. The pervasive mood within the Imperial Japanese Navy was one of overwhelming confidence in victory. This was not merely bravado. It was based on a foundation of unbroken success since December 7th. They had dominated every engagement, seized every objective, and consistently demonstrated superior training and combat effectiveness. The American fleet had been badly mauled at Pearl Harbor, And the recent Battle of the Coral Sea, while a strategic setback for Japan, was still perceived as a tactical victory where they sank an American carrier. This string of triumphs, combined with their numerical superiority and the perceived quality of their aviators, fostered an almost unshakable belief in their invincibility. This confidence was deeply rooted in the cultural context of Japanese military thought. The concept of Bushido, the warrior's code, instilled an ethos of unwavering courage, devotion, and a willingness to fight to the death. This led to an aggressive, often inflexible, offensive doctrine. For the Navy, the Kantai Keisen, or decisive battle, was the driving strategic imperative, a belief that one massive, annihilating blow could win the war. This translated into a fervent desire to engage the enemy's main force directly and destroy it. However, this unwavering confidence also bred a dangerous hubris. There was a tendency to underestimate American resolve and ingenuity, viewing them as soft and lacking the true warrior spirit. They believed that even if the Americans could fight, they could not fight with the same level of discipline, skill, or fanatical devotion. This underestimation, combined with the sheer complexity of Yamamoto's dispersed battle plan and a crucial ignorance of American code-breaking capabilities, would prove to be fatal flaws in a strategy designed to secure an empire. They sailed towards Midway, certain of triumph, unaware that their secret intentions had been laid bare and a cunning enemy awaited. Chapter 7. The Calm Before the Storm, June 1–3, 1942. The vast expanse of the Pacific, usually teeming with life, became a silent chessboard in the opening days of June 1942. Beneath the endless blue sky, two powerful navies, each unaware of the other's exact position but keenly aware of the impending clash, moved inexorably into their pre-assigned positions. For Admiral Nimitz's forces, radio silence was paramount, a ghostly shroud concealing the location of Task Forces 16 and 17 as they steamed northeast of Midway. Every minute brought them closer to the estimated Japanese approach, every mile widening the trap. On the Japanese side, Yamamoto's colossal fleet, stretched over hundreds of miles of ocean, maintained its own radio silence, a seemingly impenetrable wall behind which the Kido Butai, the invasion force, and the Aleutian diversion moved with clockwork precision. The only sound was the rhythmic thrum of engines, the whisper of waves against hulls, and the distant cry of seabirds, a deceptive peace before the deluge. Despite the radio silence, the air was thick with anticipation. Both sides launched extensive reconnaissance missions, their scout planes fanning out across hundreds of miles, searching for any sign of the enemy. American PBY Catalinas, their long wings a familiar sight, droned tirelessly from Midway, pushing the limits of their endurance. On the Japanese carriers, Zero fighters and reconnaissance aircraft patrolled the skies, though their search patterns, unbeknownst to them, would leave a crucial blind spot in the northeast. Weather concerns added another layer of anxiety. Fog and low visibility plagued the Aleutian operation, hindering Japanese air operations there, while concerns about squalls near Midway kept commanders on edge, knowing that clear skies would favor the more experienced Japanese aviators. Aboard every ship, final preparations were underway. Ordnance teams checked bombs and torpedoes, mechanics meticulously serviced aircraft, gun crews ran through drills, and mess halls served extra rations, a quiet acknowledgement of the ordeal to come. The tension aboard the American carriers was palpable, a tightly wound spring waiting to be released. For the young pilots, many fresh from flight school with limited combat experience, the days were a blur of briefings, equipment checks, and nervous banter. They understood the stakes, knew the formidable reputation of the Japanese Zero, and wrestled with the gnawing fear of the unknown. Some wrote letters home, tucked away in their lockers, just in case. For the more seasoned commanders like Rear Admiral Spruance and Rear Admiral Fletcher, the pressure was immense. They carried the weight of the nation's hopes, tasked with executing Nimitz's audacious plan. Decisions, once made, could not be unmade. Their faces, though outwardly calm, betrayed the deep concentration of men contemplating an engagement that would define their careers and potentially decide the war. Discipline was absolute, but underneath, the human element of fear, hope, and determination thrummed through every deck. Meanwhile, on Midway Island, the small garrison prepared for the worst. The idyllic atoll, with its palm trees and pristine beaches, was being transformed into a bristling fortress. U.S. Marines dug in, reinforcing gun emplacements and setting up defensive positions. Army, Air Force, and Marine Corps aviators, though fewer in number and often flying older, slower aircraft, braced themselves for the inevitable Japanese air assault. Civilian contractors, many of whom had been working to expand the airfields and facilities, were hastily evacuated or assigned emergency duties. Every available plane was readied, every gun loaded. The island became a symbol of defiance, a small speck in the vast Pacific, yet vitally important as the target that would draw the Japanese into the American trap. The calm before the storm was a period of intense preparation, silent maneuvering, and the grinding stress of anticipation. On June 4th, that calm would shatter into the deafening roar of battle, forever etching the name Midway into history. Chapter 8: The First Blows. June 3, 1942. The silent chessboard of the Pacific began to stir on June 3, 1942, as the first faint whispers of the impending storm reached American ears. The relentless PBY Catalina patrol planes, the unsung heroes of naval reconnaissance, had been tirelessly fanning out from Midway, their crews straining through binoculars over the vast, shimmering ocean. At precisely 9:04 a.m., a PBY, call sign K3, piloted by Ensign Jack Reed, broke the uneasy quiet with an electrifying radio message. Many planes heading Midway, bearing 320 degrees, distance 150. This initial report was followed quickly by another, more precise sighting by a different PBY. Enemy main body, bearing 261, distance 700 miles. 2 battleships, carriers, cruisers, mini-destroyers. While the initial reports were somewhat garbled and confusing, suggesting carriers were part of this first sighting, what the PBYs had actually found was the Japanese main body and the transport group, the less glamorous but equally vital elements of the vast invasion fleet. These were the ships carrying the ground troops, the heavy equipment, and the support vessels necessary for the actual occupation of Midway. The critical WWII, Nagumo's powerful carrier-striking force, remained hidden, still hundreds of miles to the northwest, patiently awaiting its moment to unleash its fury. Despite the absence of the coveted carriers, the sighting of any enemy force was enough to trigger a response from Midway's garrison. At 12:30 p.m., 9 B-17 flying fortresses, cumbersome but heavily armed bombers, lumbered into the sky from Eastern Island, their mission to attack the approaching Japanese transports. Their crews, unaccustomed to attacking moving ships, faced a daunting challenge. They flew at high altitude, unleashing their bombs on the distant, maneuvering targets. The results were dishearteningly limited. Despite numerous bomb drops, no direct hits were scored, though some near misses reportedly convinced the Japanese that American air defenses were more potent than anticipated. A second wave of 4 PBYs, armed with torpedoes, attempted a night attack, brave but equally ineffective in the dark. One plane was shot down, the first American casualty of the battle. Throughout the day, a profound uncertainty continued to build on the American side regarding the whereabouts of the most dangerous element of the Japanese fleet, the aircraft carriers. The initial PBY reports had been ambiguous about their presence with the main body. Nimitz and his commanders knew from their JN-25 decrypts that carriers were coming, but their exact position remained a mystery. This lack of confirmation created a tense, tactical dilemma. Should U.S. carriers launch a preemptive strike based on the possibility of a closer enemy, risking exposing themselves? Or should they maintain radio silence, remaining hidden, and await definitive word on Nagumo's location? This uncertainty was a deliberate part of Yamamoto's complex plan, designed to sow confusion and scatter American forces. While the first, largely ineffectual American blows had been struck, they had only brushed against the periphery of the Japanese force. Nagumo's carriers, the ultimate prize, remained undetected, coiled, and ready to spring their own devastating surprise. The limited results of the day's attacks, coupled with the elusive nature of the main Japanese threat, meant that as darkness fell over the Pacific, the true battle had yet to begin, and the fate of Midway remained precariously balanced. Chapter 9: Midway Under Fire. June 4th, early morning. The dawn of June 4th, 1942 broke with an ominous quiet over Midway Atoll, a brief, fragile peace that was about to be obliterated. At 4:30 a.m., Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, aboard his flagship Akagi, gave the order. The flight decks of the WWII's 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, erupted into a symphony of controlled chaos. Hundreds of Japanese pilots, the finest in the world, scrambled into their cockpits. Vals and Kates, armed with bombs and led by the experienced Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga, roared down the decks and clawed their way into the sky, forming up into 2 massive waves. Their target, Midway Island. At 5:34 a.m., a patrolling PBY Catalina delivered the chilling news: many planes heading Midway. Moments later, the skies above the atoll filled with the terrifying sight of over 100 Japanese aircraft, a perfectly orchestrated aerial armada. The Japanese aircraft launched a devastating strike on Midway Island, targeting its crucial airfields, fuel dumps, and defensive installations. Bombs rained down, turning buildings into rubble and cratering runways. Machine gun fire strafed every exposed position. Despite the overwhelming numerical and qualitative superiority of the Japanese attackers, the defense by Marine aviators and AA gunners was nothing short of heroic. The U.S. Marine Corps fighter squadrons, flying a mixed bag of F-4F Wildcats and the woefully outmatched F-2A Buffaloes, scrambled to intercept. They fought with desperate courage, throwing themselves against the waves of zeros, often against odds of 5 or 10 to 1. Major Lofton Henderson, leading a flight of Vindicator dive bombers on a desperate, unescorted attack against the Japanese carriers, which they would not find, was shot down, sacrificing his life but becoming the first Marine aviator to die in the Battle of Midway. On the ground, the island's anti-aircraft gunners, from 5-inch coastal batteries to smaller caliber weapons, poured a defiant barrage into the sky, their tracers etching desperate lines against the morning light. They managed to down several Japanese planes, a testament to their unwavering bravery under fire. Yet, valor alone could not overcome such an imbalance. The U.S. losses in aircraft and damage to infrastructure were heavy. Many American planes were shot down, either in aerial combat or while attempting to take off from the burning runways. Hangars were destroyed, communications disrupted, and the vital freshwater distillation plant was hit. Though the runways remained largely operational thanks to quick damage control, the island's air defense capability was significantly degraded. Lieutenant Tomonaga, the Japanese strike leader, radioed back to Nagumo. There is great need for a second attack. This message was pivotal. Back on the Akagi, Nagumo faced a critical decision. His combat air patrol was running low on fuel, and his strike force had just returned from Midway, requiring rearming. He had received reports of American surface ships to the northeast, but their composition was unclear, and his own long-range reconnaissance planes had failed to locate American carriers. Assuming that the initial American carrier sightings were erroneous, or that any enemy carriers were too far away to pose an immediate threat, Nagumo ordered his second strike force to be rearmed, not with anti-ship torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, but with land-attack high-explosive bombs for another assault on Midway. This fateful decision meant that when the American carriers were finally located, the decks of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu would be a volatile mess of bombs, torpedoes, and fueled aircraft, a catastrophic state of vulnerability that the Japanese carriers, unaware of approaching U.S. forces, were about to pay for with their very existence. The stage was set for the unimaginable. Chapter 10. The Sacrifice of the Torpedo Squadrons. As the Japanese first strike battered Midway, the American carrier forces, operating under the overall command of Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher aboard USS Yorktown, were already launching their own desperate counterattack. Initial, incomplete reconnaissance reports, however, had led to a scattered and uncoordinated launch. The first to reach the vicinity of the Japanese fleet, fatefully, were the obsolescent TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, slow and unmaneuverable, burdened by their heavy Mark 13 torpedoes. From the USS Hornet came Torpedo Squadron 8, Vermont 8, led by the courageous Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron. Convinced by his own flawed interpretation of intelligence that the Japanese carriers were on a different bearing, Waldron broke from his assigned course, leading his 15 planes on a direct, unescorted flight into the maw of the Japanese fleet. From the USS Enterprise came Torpedo Squadron 6, Vermont 6, led by Lieutenant Commander Eugene E. Lindsay, also flying without fighter protection, due to a series of miscommunications and delays that separated them from their accompanying dive bombers and fighters. And finally, from the USS Yorktown Torpedo Squadron 3, Vermont 3, led by Lieutenant Commander Lance E. Massey, joined the fray. The attacks launched by these U.S. torpedo squadrons were nothing short of suicidal. Arriving sequentially, and with no fighter cover whatsoever, they flew low, directly into a storm of anti-aircraft fire from the Japanese destroyer and cruiser screens, and into the murderous onslaught of the Japanese Combat Air Patrol, composed of the highly maneuverable and superior Zero fighters. The Devastators were easy targets, their slow speed and predictable attack runs making them vulnerable. One by one, they were swatted from the sky, plummeting into the ocean in fiery explosions or crashing with sickening thuds. The losses were massive, nearly all aircraft destroyed. Of VT-8's 15 planes, all 15 were shot down. Of VT-6's 14 planes, all 14 were lost. VT-3, arriving later with a partial fighter escort, which was quickly overwhelmed, fared little better, losing 10 of its 12 aircraft. It was an almost complete annihilation, a horrifying testament to the bravery of the pilots and gunners who pressed their attacks in the face of impossible odds, knowing full well they were unlikely to return. Their torpedoes, if they even managed to launch them, either missed or were duds, failing to inflict any damage on the agile Japanese carriers. Among the few survivors of this horrifying ordeal was Ensign George Gay of Vermont 8. Shot down and wounded, Gay clung to a seat cushion in the water, hidden by the debris and confusion, for hours, a chillingly close spectator to the unfolding battle. His vivid eyewitness accounts later provided crucial details of the Japanese fleet's movements and vulnerability. Gay, though just one man, became a powerful symbol of the immense sacrifice made by these doomed squadrons. Their failure to inflict damage on the Japanese carriers, however, paradoxically set the stage for victory. While the torpedo plans were being massacred, they were inadvertently performing a critical service. The low-altitude, determined attacks of the devastators forced the Japanese Zero fighters to descend from their high-altitude combat air patrol to engage them. This crucial tactical error left the skies above the Japanese carriers largely undefended and cleared of Zeros. Simultaneously, it distracted the Japanese anti-aircraft batteries, fixing their attention on the low-flying torpedo bombers. At the precise moment the last devastators were being wiped out, high above them, unseen and unheard, American dive bombers were screaming down from the heavens. The sacrifice of the torpedo squadrons, though seemingly futile, bought the precious minutes and created the crucial tactical window that would transform the battle from a potential defeat into an astonishing, impossible triumph. Chapter 11. 6 Minutes That Changed the World. The sky above the Japanese carrier fleet, moments before, had been a maelstrom of anti-aircraft fire and intertwining dogfights as the Zeros ruthlessly decimated the American torpedo squadrons. But as the last brave devastator plunged into the waves, a sudden, eerie calm descended. High above, unseen by the Japanese preoccupied with the low-flying torpedo planes, a different breed of American aircraft materialized from the vast emptiness. These were the SBD Dauntless dive bombers, the unsung workhorses of the U.S. Navy from the USS Enterprise, VB-6 and VS-6, and the miraculously repaired USS Yorktown, VB-3 and VS-3. Their arrival was nothing short of the perfect moment. Leading the Enterprise Air Group, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey had made a desperate, inspired guess, extending his search pattern far beyond doctrine after failing to find the Japanese. His fuel nearly exhausted, he spotted the wake of a lone Japanese destroyer heading back to the main fleet, a clue he gambled everything on. Lieutenant Commander Max Leslie, leading Yorktown's dive bombers, had also faced similar navigational challenges, but arrived just moments after McCluskey's group. Below them, the Japanese carriers, having recovered their fighters and rearmed a portion of their strike force for the second attack on Midway, were caught in an unspeakably vulnerable state. What followed was a concentrated, devastating onslaught. From nearly 20,000 feet, the Dauntlesses initiated their terrifying, near-vertical dives, their siren-like dive breaks screaming through the air. The Japanese deck crews, moments before bustling with activity, looked up in horror as the sky seemed to open and rain destruction. The bombs found their marks with chilling precision. At 10:22 a.m., bombs from Enterprise planes slammed into the mighty Kaga, tearing through her flight deck and igniting a series of catastrophic explosions in her hangar deck, which was packed with fueled and armed aircraft. Simultaneously, other Enterprise bombs ripped into Nagumo's flagship, Akagi. One hit near the aft elevator, another penetrated the flight deck, unleashing a chain reaction as bombs and torpedoes stored below detonated. Moments later, just as Enterprise bombers were pulling out, Yorktown's dive bombers arrived and descended upon Soryu. Multiple hits ripped apart her flight deck and ignited her interior, turning her into a raging inferno. The reason for the rapid, devastating destruction was clear. The Japanese carriers were caught with decks full of fuel, planes, and bombs. Nagumo's indecision and the urgent need for a second strike on Midway had led to a chaotic scene below decks. Fuel lines snaked across hangar bays, connecting aircraft to tanks. Bombs and torpedoes, hastily brought up from magazines and waiting to be loaded, littered the decks. When the American bombs struck, they ignited aviation fuel, detonated ordnance, and turned the confined hangar decks into hellish blast furnaces. Firefighting efforts were futile. The internal explosions were too severe, the fires too intense. In a breathtaking span of 6 minutes, the strategic balance of the Pacific War was violently, utterly reversed. 3 of Japan's 4 most formidable fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were transformed from powerful instruments of war into burning, uncontrollable wrecks, their destinies sealed. Their destruction was a catastrophic blow, not just in terms of material loss, but in the irreplaceable loss of hundreds of highly trained pilots, mechanics, and experienced flight deck crews. The Japanese had sailed into battle with overwhelming confidence, only to be struck down by a combination of American intelligence, tactical timing, and an astonishingly perfect convergence of events. The impossible had happened, and the Imperial Japanese Navy, for the first time, was staring at the abyss of decisive defeat. Chapter 12. Hiryu's Last Stand. The devastating blows that crippled Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu in those 6 pivotal minutes did not immediately end the battle. From the sole surviving Japanese fleet carrier, the Hiryu, a man of indomitable will prepared to strike back. Vice Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi, commander of Carrier Division 2 and a brilliant, aggressive tactician, understood the desperate odds, but he refused to yield. "We must strike back at once," he declared. Hiryu was detached from the burning wrecks, her aircraft being furiously ready for a counterblow. Yamaguchi launched 2 desperate airstrikes against the Americans, believing they had only one carrier. His first wave, consisting of 18 Naval dive bombers and 6 Zero fighters, found the USS Yorktown at 12 p.m. Despite fierce anti-aircraft fire and attacks by Yorktown's own few remaining fighters, 3 bombs slammed into the carrier. They ripped through her flight deck, ignited fires, and jammed her elevators. Though severely damaged and listing, Yorktown's damage control teams fought valiantly, getting her underway again within the hour. Yamaguchi, however, received reports that Yorktown was dead in the water, convincing him she was finished. Satisfied with his first strike, Yamaguchi launched a second wave of 10 K torpedo planes and 6 Zero fighters at 2:30 p.m. Again, they found the limping Yorktown, mistaking her for a second American carrier. This time, 2 torpedoes slammed into her port side, ripping huge holes in her hull and causing her to take on a severe list. Power failed, and the order was given to abandon ship. The Japanese carrier Hiryu had struck back, damaging Yorktown severely, and for a moment, it seemed she might have exacted a heavy toll in return for the losses of her sister ships. But the Americans were not done. Even as Yorktown's crew struggled for their lives, reconnaissance planes from Enterprise had located the elusive Hiryu. At 5 p.m., a combined force of dive bombers, 10 from Enterprise and 4 from the surviving Yorktown Air Group, launched from Enterprise, screamed down on Japan's last operational fleet carrier. The attack was swift and brutal. 4 bombs slammed into Hiryu's flight deck, igniting explosions that mirrored the fate of her consorts. Flames engulfed the ship, and within hours, she was a burning hulk. Yamaguchi chose to go down with his ship, a final act of Bushido. With the destruction of Hiryu, the end of Japanese carrier strike power at Midway was absolute. All 4 of the Imperial Japanese Navy's main fleet carriers, the backbone of their Pacific dominance, lay broken and burning. The decisive battle Yamamoto had sought had indeed occurred, but with the result he could never have conceived. As nightfall descended on June 4th, the vast, shimmering Pacific grew dark, illuminated only by the distant glow of the dying Japanese carriers. On the American side, a sense of cautious triumph mingled with exhaustion and grief. Task Force 16 and the remnants of Task Force 17 regrouped and assessed losses. The Yorktown was gone, a bitter price to pay for victory, and many brave pilots and sailors had been lost throughout the day. But the scale of the Japanese defeat was slowly becoming apparent. The immediate threat to Midway was eliminated. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once seemingly invincible, had suffered a catastrophic, irreversible blow to its carrier arm. The long, bloody road to victory in the Pacific would continue, but the direction had fundamentally and irrevocably shifted. The strategic initiative now lay firmly in American hands. Chapter 13. The Price of Victory. The pre-dawn hours of June 5th found the Pacific cloaked in an uneasy silence, broken only by the lapping of waves against hulls and the distant, acrid smell of smoke. For the U.S. Navy, the jubilation of the previous day's impossible triumph was tempered by the grim reality of their losses, most notably the grievously wounded USS Yorktown. Despite heroic damage control efforts and the removal of her crew, the gallant carrier was still afloat, under tow, and with hopes of salvage. However, Admiral Yamamoto, still clinging to a desperate hope of salvaging something from the disaster, had dispatched a Japanese submarine, I-168, on a mission of vengeance. At 4:30 a.m. on June 6th, I-168 located the drifting Yorktown, attended by the destroyer USS Hammond and salvage tugs. The submarine fired 4 torpedoes. 2 slammed into the already crippled Yorktown, tearing through her hull and sealing her fate. A 3rd torpedo struck the alongside Hammond, splitting the destroyer in half. Within minutes, the Hammond sank, taking 80 of her crew with her. The Yorktown, a veteran of Coral Sea and a vital participant in Midway's decisive blows, finally succumbed at 7:01 a.m. on June 7th, rolling onto her port side and slipping beneath the waves. Her loss was a bitter yet understandable price for the victory achieved. The battle had exacted a heavy toll on the American forces. Beyond the Yorktown and Hammond, the U.S. Navy suffered the loss of 145 aircraft, many of them the brave but obsolete TBD Devastators, and 307 personnel killed. Each loss represented a personal tragedy: the young aviators who pressed their attacks against overwhelming odds, the gunners on Midway who stood their ground against waves of bombers, and the sailors who fought fires and helped save their shipmates. These were acts of American courage and heroism that, while overshadowed by the strategic victory, were etched into the memories of those who survived. Pilots like Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron and Ensign George Gay of Torpedo Squadron 8 became immediate legends, their sacrifice a stark reminder of the cost of victory. For the Japanese, however, the price of defeat was catastrophic and irreversible. They had gambled everything on Midway and lost. The Imperial Japanese Navy left the Central Pacific with 4 of its finest and most experienced fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, at the bottom of the ocean. In addition to these priceless vessels, they lost the heavy cruiser Mikuma and over 248 aircraft. Crucially, they also lost an irreplaceable cadre of elite aviators, veterans of Pearl Harbor and every subsequent campaign. These were the best trained, most experienced pilots and aircrews in the world, and their loss severely crippled Japan's carrier air arm for the remainder of the war. Unlike ships, experienced pilots could not be replaced quickly, and this human capital deficit would prove to be a strategic handicap from which Japan would never fully recover. The strategic consequences were immediate and profound. Midway was saved, its vital airfields remaining in American hands. The Japanese offensive in the Pacific was not just halted, it was decisively thrown back. The battle irrevocably shifted the balance of power in the Pacific permanently. Prior to Midway, Japan held the initiative, dictating the pace and direction of the war. After Midway, that initiative passed decisively to the United States. The era of Japanese expansion was over, replaced by a grim reality of defense and attrition. While the war would rage on for 3 more brutal years, requiring immense sacrifice and effort, the path to ultimate Allied victory in the Pacific began irrevocably on that pivotal day in June 1942, in the waters surrounding Midway Atoll. Chapter 14. Legends Forged at Sea. The Battle of Midway, for all its strategic grandeur and tactical brilliance, was ultimately a testament to the courage, skill, and sacrifice of individuals. Their actions, often under unimaginable pressure, forged legends that would echo through the annals of naval history. At the apex of command stood Admiral Chester Nimitz, the quiet, unassuming architect of victory. Nimitz's genius lay not in flashy maneuvers, but in his calm demeanor, his unwavering trust in his intelligence officers, and his bold willingness to take a calculated gamble. He knew the risks but saw the opportunity, making the crucial decisions that allowed his forces to be in the right place at the right time. His leadership provided the steady hand that guided the Pacific Fleet through its darkest hour. Sharing the burden of tactical command were Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher and Rear Admiral Raymond A. Spruance. Fletcher, the senior officer, made the vital decision to launch the carrier strikes early, a critical choice that put American planes in the air at the crucial moment. Though his Yorktown was lost, his leadership was instrumental. Spruance, a battleship admiral leading carriers for the first time, displayed extraordinary coolness under pressure. His methodical approach, his decision to recover his aircraft before launching another strike, and his astute tactical sense ensured that the Enterprise and Hornet air groups delivered their devastating blows with maximum effect. He proved to be a natural-born carrier commander, a revelation in a battle that changed naval warfare forever. Among the aviators, names like Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey became synonymous with daring initiative. His desperate 2-hour search for the Japanese carriers, extending far beyond his planned range and culminating in the sighting of the critical destroyer Wake, was a monumental act of perseverance that directly led to the discovery of Nagumo's fleet. And within his squadron, Lieutenant Richard H. Best of VB-6 achieved a singular distinction. He was the only pilot to score bomb hits on 2 Japanese carriers, Akagi and Hiryu, in a single day. His pinpoint accuracy and relentless pursuit embodied the aggressive spirit of the dive bomber pilots. The story of Ensign George Gay, the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8's doomed attack, became a poignant symbol of the torpedo plane's sacrifice. Clinging to wreckage for hours in the shark-infested waters, he watched the battle unfold, a harrowing ordeal that later allowed him to provide invaluable eyewitness testimony. His survival underscored the brutal cost paid by his squadron, whose futile but vital attacks cleared the skies for the dive bombers. Behind the scenes, Commander Joseph J. Rochefort stood as the unsung hero of intelligence. His brilliant cryptanalytic work at Station Hypo, particularly the AF's Midway deception, provided Nimitz with the critical foresight that made the ambush possible. Working tirelessly in his basement office, Rochefort's intellectual victory set the stage for the triumph at sea. Beyond these prominent figures, Midway was fought by thousands of ordinary sailors, pilots, gunners, and medics, whose personal stories collectively formed the fabric of the victory. There were the brave Marine pilots on Midway, scrambling their few, outmatched planes to meet the overwhelming Japanese strike, often flying into certain death. There were the damage control parties on Yorktown, fighting desperate fires and patching holes with superhuman effort, saving their ship for precious hours. There were the gunners on every ship, their hands blistered, their ears ringing as they poured relentless fire into the sky. Medics worked tirelessly in chaotic sick bays, tending to the wounded. For many, it was their first taste of combat, a horrifying, exhilarating, and ultimately defining experience. The camaraderie forged in those intense hours lasted a lifetime, binding men together through shared trauma and triumph. The profound bravery and sacrifice at Midway were recognized with numerous awards and decorations. Medal of Honor citations were posthumously awarded to heroes like Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron, commander of Torpedo Squadron 8, and other flyers who pressed their attacks to the ultimate limit. Navy Crosses, Silver Stars, and Purple Hearts were bestowed upon countless others, a testament to individual valor across all ranks and rates. For the survivors, The impact of Midway resonated throughout their lives. Many continued to fight through the rest of the war, carrying the lessons and the trauma of that day. Some carried visible scars, others invisible ones. Yet, for all, the experience shaped their perspectives, their careers, and their understanding of humanity's capacity for both destruction and extraordinary courage. They became living testaments to the battle, their stories ensuring that the legends forged in the crucible of Midway would never fade. Chapter 15. The Legacy of Midway. The echoes of the Battle of Midway continue to resonate through the annals of military history, a profound and enduring testament to a clash that irrevocably altered the course of World War II and the future of naval strategy. This legacy is multifaceted, shaping doctrine, inspiring narratives, and serving as a perpetual reminder of the fine line between victory and defeat. First and foremost, Midway decisively cemented how carrier warfare changed forever. Before June 1942, the battleship, with its massive guns and heavy armor, was still widely considered the queen of the seas, the ultimate arbiter of naval power. Even after Pearl Harbor, many strategists clung to this dogma. Midway, however, proved with devastating clarity that the aircraft carrier was the new dominant capital ship. The battle was fought entirely by aircraft, with opposing fleets never once exchanging fire. It demonstrated that air power, launched from mobile, floating airfields, could project destructive force hundreds of miles, rendering surface fleets vulnerable and obsolete without adequate aerial protection. The loss of 4 Japanese fleet carriers, all sunk by aerial attack, signaled the definitive end of the all-big-gun era, and ushered in the age of carrier task forces, a strategic shift that would define naval operations for the remainder of the war and for decades to come. Midway's place in U.S. Navy and World War II history is unparalleled. It marked the definitive turning point in the Pacific theater. Prior to Midway, the Imperial Japanese Navy held the strategic initiative, constantly on the offensive, dictating the terms of engagement. Afterward, the initiative passed to the United States. While the war would be long and brutal, with many more hard-fought campaigns, Japan was forced onto the defensive, its expansion halted, and its offensive capabilities severely crippled. For the U.S. Navy, it was a desperately needed morale boost, a validation of their intelligence efforts, their training, and their resilience in the face of initial defeat. It ignited a renewed sense of purpose and confidence that propelled them through the arduous island-hopping campaigns towards Japan itself. The story of Midway has, naturally, become embedded in media depictions, museums, and national memory. From classic Hollywood films like John Ford's 1942 documentary The Battle of Midway and the star-studded 1976 epic Midway, to more recent, CGI-laden blockbusters, the battle has captivated audiences, bringing its drama and heroism to new generations. Museums across the United States, particularly the National Naval Aviation Museum and the World War II Museum, dedicate significant exhibits to the battle, showcasing artifacts, personal accounts, and interactive displays that immerse visitors in the experience. Memorials stand as solemn tributes to those lost, ensuring that the sacrifice and triumph are not forgotten. These cultural touchstones collectively shape how the battle is remembered, as a testament to American ingenuity, courage, and perseverance against overwhelming odds. Ultimately, the enduring final thoughts on courage, timing, and intelligence in war that emerge from Midway are profound. It underscored the critical, often unseen role of intelligence. Without the tireless work of Rochefort's codebreakers, the American fleet would have been blind. It highlighted the unforgiving nature of timing. A few minutes, a different decision by a commander, or a slight change in the weather could have swung the pendulum of fate in the opposite direction. And most importantly, it celebrated the sheer courage of the individual. From the torpedo plane pilots who knowingly flew to their deaths, to the dive bomber crews who defied exhaustion and anti-aircraft fire, to the commanders who made agonizing decisions under the crucible of combat. Midway stands as a timeless lesson in military strategy, a testament to the unpredictable nature of conflict, and a powerful narrative of human resilience forged in the crucible of the Pacific. It remains one of the greatest naval victories in history, a battle that truly changed the world.